I'd like to start tonight just by having everybody give your idea when you're talking about democracy. What do you really mean by that? I'm curious to see what it means to each of us. I've tried defining this in many different ways, but who'd like to start on this?
Well, I wrote something out because I didn't think I could remember to
All
get
right,
two
well,
sentences.
go ahead.
But it's nothing profound, and there's a bunch of asterisks you could add as I read it. But anyway, this is my thoughts. Democracy is a form of government in which citizens, what's a citizen, who's a citizen, are encouraged to participate and having a say as to the laws and policies that a government establishes. And then democracy can be direct, in which each citizen has a direct vote on every law or policy enacted by the government, or indirect, in which each citizen has a vote to elect representatives who best represent the citizens' views on government's laws and policies and who vote directly on enacting those laws and policies. Most democracies are of the latter form. Participation is voluntary, and its degree and quality varies widely among citizens. So that's my contribution.
Looking at a large scale democracy, does the same definition apply to small scale democracy? Like if the five of us were going to do a democratic process here, the same thing apply?
Oh, sure. I don't. Yeah, we would be direct. We'd have a direct democracy, and in in New England towns, that have town meeting form of government. If they're small enough, they do have a direct democracy. If they're larger, they elect town precincts, but neighborhood representatives who represent so many people in an area of the town. Like Needham was a town meeting with town meeting representatives that had the votes. So you could lobby your neighbor if he was a representative, or pay him off with a steak dinner to vote. Whichever works.
All right.
For
Who's
my
next?
part, I usually go to a dictionary, and I even went to it takes more muscle than I got almost to get my old Oxford English Dictionary down off the shelves, the paper copy, and then try to read it with a magnifying glass. But essentially, you go to the Greek demo, the people plus rule, or the Latin res publica, affairs of the people. They cross-reference each other again and again. There seems to be no distinction in that sense between democracy and republic or republicanism, however you would use the phrase equivalently, the term equivalently. So I think of republic as kind of shorthand for democratic or democracy. Now that's clearly started way back then, and as the article that I sent kind of explains, is there have been many varieties of it. People call themselves, China, the Democratic Republic of China, perhaps. What it means and how it means. I don't know that there's really any distinction between the two, and I don't even know that if it's worth arguing about. It's of, by, and for the people, the rule. And that's kind of the summary, my summary judgment of it. I think we'd be better off pursuing things like the electoral college. You want a direct vote, that would be an easy one to affect. And I think we'll never get to the bottom of arguing over what these things mean because of the way they twist and turn and so on. That's my thing.
Well, I thought that the author, although I thought that a lot of his article had some diversions where he was raising some rather trite or remote references to what other people thought democracy was and how he thought that was an aberration of some sort. But I thought that his definition that went back to Abraham Lincoln was succinct, and it captured a lot of what that I feel about it. It's of, by, and for the people. And he even went to the trouble of defining what that meant. The people own the government, and acting collectively and according to rules may shake it up and change the policies when they wish. Government by the people is ordinary citizens, staff, and guide its decisions. Government for the people, its policies are meant to benefit the citizenry as a whole. And so, that to me is pretty succinct in that. But within all that, I think that there's a lot that to really to digest, because when the people, the of people, decide to really shake up the rules, they tend to put in the people of the by people who will support their policies and modes of government, and supposedly that's going to benefit the citizenry as a whole. But I can see where if the people who are of and by are not really interested in supporting the people as a whole, that you can have aberrations there. You can find that people are left out. I think that throughout our history, we've had that, where the government was not supporting people as a whole, and we see it, still that today. And perhaps the right, when they define the democracy that they're interested in, they look at the left and see what the left is doing. They think of the left as taking control of the policies. The left is the deep state, and the policies that are being administered and the benefit of is not for them, but for other people. And I think that may be the core of the root of people's angst over the left and the right. What are you going to do when you get in there? And you have all the rules. You'll have the rules, which are the Constitution. But are you really going to look after the people as a whole? Which is kind of the bottom line. Each one of these of, by, and for can impact the others. And so it's a very, very dynamic thing. It isn't just static like it sounds. It's how you're really going to administer that really makes a difference in how the democracy is going to function. Hitler was elected, but he quickly took his by the people and made it his people by the people for the people, and he turned it into something that was totally aberrant and broke all the other rules and policies that had been in place before that. So you could say it was a democracy, but it didn't turn out that way. So I thought that the author caught something that was significant, but it spoke to the fact that these relationships have to be dynamic, and they have to play by set rules, and they have to be fair, if you will.
To me, the whole concept of democracy in America is a straw man. We talk about is democracy on the line? Is democracy, at risk? Well, we're not a democracy to begin with. That's a word that we like to describe ourselves as. When I think of the fundamental unit of life, it's the family, and the family's not a democracy, or it shouldn't be. It's not going to be successful that way. I made the point in one of my tomes that capitalism is the closest thing to a democracy, because you're voting every time you spend $1. And what I thought about was what does being in the United States mean for me? I have a very small voice. I have access to social and governmental avenues and opportunities. But when I think about if I vote for, well, I think most elections are like 52 to 48. So half the people are unhappy every time, or they didn't get their wish. And then let's take a congressperson goes to Washington, and now they've got to do what the party says to do, because we're playing the party politics, and we got to stay in power, and we got to get reelected, and we got to raise money, and it didn't matter that and someone running for Congress says, well, I'm going to get up there and fix the border. Well, hell, you can't fix the border. One congressperson can't do all these things. Even presidents have said, I'm going to do this. Trump was going to build the border wall. He built a few miles of it, but he did not build a border wall. He did not make Mexico pay for it, etc. So what I look at is, well, what is my role? It's a very small role, very small voice, but I do have access. I can call my congressman. I can write to my congressman. I can go to the rallies. All those things. Obviously, I don't have to recite them. That's democracy to me, as I experience it personally.
It's interesting. Interesting. As I was preparing for this, the thing that caught my eye, I just rewatched Ken Burns' series on Benjamin Franklin, and it was very interesting because especially the section where they were in the midst of drafting the Constitution, and they wrestled with this problem of what kind of government are we going to create. And they came from a background of autocracy, and they were all wealthy white property owners who were doing this. But this was, as part of the environment of the Enlightenment, they were wrestling with this idea. And I think if you probe a little deeper, they were trying to establish a process. Franklin said after the Constitution was drafted that this was the most important part of it was the section on amendments, that we have to change this as time goes on and perfect it and modify it in changing times. And I'm always bothered by folks who want to go back to the originalist view, because there were things that they did that obviously are immoral. I mean, slavery, among others. But I was writing something that kind of, I don't know, approaches it more from the notion of a process. If I can pull this up real quickly here. And I say democracy is the process of collective decision making. How within any body of whether it's the 5 of us or if it's 5 million of us, we have a process of coming to a decision. That decision might be an election. It might be the drafting of a law. It could be decisions to go to war or not go to war, whatever the decision is. You define a process and you refine that process over time. And it's a process in which all the eligible persons, citizens, registered, who are eligible to vote, share their perspectives. And for me, that's the most important thing. David, as you were saying, you have a voice. Well, getting your voice into the mix is important. If the 5 of us were trying to come up with a decision and 2 of us didn't speak, well, we might say we made a decision 3-2, but we really didn't. We didn't hear from everyone. So we can't assume that everybody agrees. So there's a responsibility of sharing your perspective. And you share your perspective, and then once everyone has put their ideas there or expressed their opinion, then you choose one of the available options. You can't choose to do something that's impossible. You have to choose something that can be done. I've been through this in small groups where people want to budget, well, let's spend $20,000 here. Well, we don't have $20,000, so that's not a possibility. Okay, so you have to choose a possible option, and you have to agree beforehand that you will abide by the rule of the majority. That's a very critical part of it. That, yeah, we're going to go through this process, and in the end, win or lose, as far as my idea is concerned, I agree to go along with the will of the majority, and I will abide by it. But I reserve the right to object, and I reserve the right to call for reconsideration or amendment. So that's how I'm looking at it. It's the process. It's not the set of laws. And I think where democracy, David, to your point, I do think democracy is under threat, but I think it's been under threat for a long time. I think Citizens United is a threat to democracy. I think thinking of corporations as people is a threat to democracy because
Money is speech.
yeah, it's saying that the goal in politics is to have my idea prevail over the enemy, meaning the other side. No, the goal of politics is compromise, coming to an agreement for all of us. And the things that say the good of the people, okay, we have to consider the good of all the people. And I'm most bothered by, especially the Congress now, who they're saying that it's always been true to a certain extent, but they're saying it explicitly. The Speaker of the House now saying we're not going to pass laws because that doesn't favor our political agenda. That used to be a hidden thing. That it was going on, but nobody spoke it out loud. Now they just say it out loud. We're not going to do this because it's going to hurt Trump in the campaign. Wait a minute. That's the most undemocratic thing I've ever heard. You're not even trying to do the will of the people. You're trying to win. And anyway, that's my take on it.
Well, the founders of the Constitution were worried about there being too much democracy, and they wanted to put limits on it because you couldn't have somebody out in Western Mass who doesn't want to pay the tax on corn, revolt and say, I'm not paying, you have to limit that in some way. And so that, from the beginning, it was never thought to be they were a little nervous about the idea of a direct democracy. But Michael, you also talked about things being possible. How possible is it? I mean, is it a reasonable assumption to think that people come into an election with open minds and are interested in being seeing other views and considering those? I think that's the impossible, that people have an open mind. I mean, you have people that are, that wrap themselves up in a certain ideology, and it's like a suit of armor. No one's going to break through that, and they're not really thinking about anything else except what supports their ideology. And I don't know how you get through to those people. So
it's a double-edged sword. What I was going to say is that the people who are most likely to be malleable right before an election are probably the people who are least informed, who have not spent a lot of time on it, and so they come in and it's the sort of a last impression kind of thing. But it is true that the people, most of us, gravitate to one camp or the other, and that's where we stay.
Yeah. Tying in with what Michael says, I think one of the problems is that it's a representative democracy, but our representatives don't always represent the interests of the people. They represent their desire to get reelected, like you said. They represent the interests of the party. They represent the interests of the big donors that give them money and say, we'll give you this money if you enact this legislation. And so that's the problem. They're not, or some of them are just interested in getting hits on Facebook. So
it's also an issue of trust. Do you who in politics, who in government do you trust?
Yeah.
Can you think of anyone?
I don't know if I have people off the top of my head, but I do have, like, there was a Republican. There was an article in the Times about how the Republican Party is going to kill itself because it's just not doing anything to enact legislation. They want to investigate people, and they want to kick people out, and they want to this, but they don't want to really pass it. And this is a Republican senator said, we were here to to get things done, to achieve things, to, and I can't be part of I don't like it that our party doesn't want to enact any legislation. They just want to investigate and stuff. And so I admire that person. I think I might trust it. I trust Mitt Romney. Really. He was a governor of Massachusetts. He did a great job because he was rational and he wanted to solve problems and he wasn't ideological. That ideological, let's put it that way. So yeah, I trust him. I trust who else would I trust? I don't know. I'll get back to you on that, David.
Well,
I trust Michael. If Michael wants to run for Congress, I vote for him.
well, let me ask a question of something that came up recently that I think is germane to this. And Dave Vislisel, I wanted to get your opinion on this, particularly because I think you may be close to it. But I got an email the other day from the head of the Democratic Party in Jefferson County, and she's very upset about a bill that's going before the state legislature that was proposed by some of the Republican council members, Metro Council members, who want the Metro Council to be a nonpartisan race. Okay. Now, in St. Matthew's politics, we have nonpartisan election. And that means, people are running, they don't have a D or an R next to their name. And that there are some problems associated with that. But generally speaking, I would like to take the D's and the R's off of all the ballots. That I don't think someone should come into the polling place and pick up a ballot and mark straight party R without considering who the candidates are. I think that's not a good thing.
I'd encourage people to look past their ideology.
Yeah. So to me, even though I'm registered as a Democrat, I look at the candidates. I don't just vote for a Democrat that I don't know. If I don't know something about it, I haven't explored something about them, I just don't vote. I'm not going to. I think about George Santos and those people who put a check mark by his name without investigating him, and you get this pathological liar in Congress. I mean, we get some of those anyway, but if you had done a little due diligence on Santos, you would have known he was a pathological liar and he wouldn't have been elected. So the fact that he had an R next to his name is the only reason he got in office. So what do you think of that? Should all elections be nonpartisan?
I can see the attraction for that. And I would probably lean in the direction that you are leaning, which is get rid of those labels. Now, I think it's easier. Well, remember when judges are nonpartisan. Remember how we wrestled with those issues?
Oh, yeah.
And how what we did was largely dig into, well, what does this person believe? We're trying to really figure out whether that person is progressive in the sense of the general sense of progressive, or maybe reactionary. And so we're trying to figure out, are you a Republican or a Democrat indirectly? I think that will always go on. But if we could bury that, and especially in a smaller community like this, I think it's possible it could work. So, I'm a little wary of it because I understand that it's with the Republicans being in the minority on Metro Council. I can understand why, and this is promoted by Republicans, is to let's fade away or shade away the fact that we're Republicans. We want a sneaky, underhanded, underground, sub rosa way of being elected without tipping off how conservative we are. And we may get some Democrats, some progressives to vote our way because they don't look at it. There's an agenda there. I think it's absolutely clear.
I think if they really
how I'd want to go or not, I don't know. It's a good question though.
Yeah. Go ahead, Larry.
I think if they're really sincere that that's a problem, that they should draft a law to make it apply to all offices across the state. And if they're, if it really is, they believe that the problem is that people are just being too ideological because of the letter next to their name, then let's just make it that way everywhere. So
I go even farther. I say, and this is the hard part, anybody who wants to have that office and you're qualified, put your name in a hat and draw a name out.
Whoa.
They're all qualified. They're all good people. That's the hard part. How do you know?
Yeah.
right.
But if we wonder why we're divided as a country, doesn't the two-party system lie right in the bullseye of that? That's why we're divided, because
Yes.
people pick their team and then they vote their team. They don't go further to explore who the person is. They just know who's the Democrat. Well, that's who I'm voting for. And that may be good for the party to help them win elections, but it's not good for the country. And one of the things I point out, and I'm trying to, I've told this to Metro Council members and to my state representative, and I want this idea to spread. Why in the hell do taxpayers subsidize primary elections? Primary elections are private elections of private parties, the private Democratic Party and the private Republican parties. These are not public institutions. They're private entities, and they're private entities whose primary function is raising money. Who is the Democratic Party?
In some states you can vote in either primary, like in New Hampshire.
Yeah, but why do we do it at all? We don't hold an election for the Teamsters Union. We don't hold an election for the PTA. We don't subsidize them and pay for the ballots and provide the voting space and pay the folks who are doing the counting. Why do we do it for the Democratic and Republican parties? They're not government institutions, and yet we're taking tax dollars and we're using them for those folks. Now, I'm not saying to eliminate political parties. I think there ought to be more political parties where people get together and talk about issues and establish policies and suggest regulations and rules and so forth. And they can endorse whoever they want. I mean, Biden was seeking today the endorsement from the Teamsters. Well, that's fine. The Teamsters can support whoever they want in the election, but I'm not going to pay for the Teamsters Union election. Why do I pay for the Democratic Party election? It's the same thing as the Teamsters Union. The only difference is they've somehow, because so many of them got into office, they've persuaded us that we have a choice between red and blue. Well, we have a full spectrum of choice. You don't have.
Okay, the counter argument is it's good for the country that there be primary elections. The Teamsters members pay for their Teamsters Union. We're members of the USA, so we pay.
We're not members of the Democratic Party.
If we're registered as Democrat, aren't we members of the Democratic Party?
Try to set the Democratic Party platform. Go there and say, this is what I want in the platform. You don't have a vote there.
So why do we register as Democrat or Republican?
Because they ask us to, because they set it up that way. And what my contention is, that's the problem. That if
independent and I know you can register independent in Massachusetts where we were.
Well, you should be able to register whatever way you want, but the primary election for a candidate doesn't make sense. If you can run for an office without being a part of a party, you can be a sole individual and you can run for an election. So that's how it should happen. Now, if I'm whether I'm Michael Price or Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever I am, I can run for the office. And if the Democratic Party wants to endorse me and the Republican Party wants to endorse somebody else, that's fine. But they don't have a right to own the ballots and
that's the way it used to be, right? The party members and the party leaders would get together in the cigar smoke back room and pick their candidate. And people said, don't do it that way anymore. I
Well-
want more say.
Well, I
Well,
wonder what
I
would happen if you could have 20 people throw their hat in the ring for Congress, for a Congress position.
in a democracy, that's fine. You have 1,000 people put it in. You know,
But the
if you want to have a
growing,
runoff election and say, okay, we're going to have, instead of a primary election, you have a spring runoff, and you have, I don't know, 20,000 people on the ballot, and then you pick the top 3 or 4 candidates to run in the fall. That's fine.
the fastest growing non-party in the country is the independent class.
Right.
More and more of them are going that direction, both Democrats and Republicans, and may soon be enough that they're going to be a significant, a swing group,
Mhm.
I suppose you could call it. So it's a kind of third party, but it's also confirmation of the suspicion that more and more people have that the Democrats and Republicans are not going to come to terms. They're not going to get together to agree, to come up with supportable programs to move forward on anything. So, and the second thing I would say is that I think it's kind of amazing that we have gone all this time through our history where there's been a third party pop up or a fourth party, but they've tended to disappear into the balanced. You're either progressive or Democrat or you're Republican. And they've switched sides in all kinds of issues, including racial stuff, as was demonstrated in the South. So, they're animals of their own creation, supported by little people like us in a way, but bigger people. And of course, the big power people are the people in Congress and in government and the lobbyists and so on. But isn't it kind of amazing that we have just settled on, again and again, we still are only a two-party country compared to, say, France, Italy, Germany, well, you name them.
Yeah.
Those are all kind of democratic republics like we are, more or less. They lean this way or they lean that way and so on. I'm just kind of amazed that it's held as steady as it has, but maybe it's beginning to break up, is my point.
Is anybody who knows more about the development of the Constitution know why the founders rejected a parliamentary system where you have the possibility of more parties and that the government is formed after the election? The different groups that have delegates have to get together and form the government.
Well,
I think a contribution of that to that was that each state already had its own constitution, and it was relevant to what that state's condition, situation, size, social norms, and so on. So they had to somehow accommodate all those individual states. And boy, that's a hell of a job that they did. I mean, that's amazing that they did that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
And
the parliamentary system was.
They came up with
I'm not sure the parliamentary system was even in existence. Sorry.
Go ahead, Larry. I didn't hear that.
I'm not sure that was the parliamentary system even in existence back at that time. Was that something that
there was in England? I mean, it was in fact, the Parliament. It was the English Civil War, in which the Parliament asserted greater power vis-a-vis the king. Well, there was no king. There was Cromwell was a director. I forget what his title was, but
when the Constitution was drafted here, there were no political parties.
Right.
Political parties came later. In fact, George Washington warned against having political parties, and I think he warned against them because of exactly what we have now. That you'd find people would you choose sides. I think one of the things that bothers me most is the idea that once you decide which side you're on, you now agree with them on all their policies. You know, we had something that happened, I guess it was yesterday, when the CEOs from all the tech companies were there, and we had a congressional hearing. For the first time, Democrats and Republicans were agreeing, I guess because they had a common enemy, which was, you know, Silicon Valley, but they were agreeing on something. And that's, as far as I know, that's the only issue that they agree on. They don't agree on abortion. They don't agree on immigration. They don't agree on foreign policy. So if you're a Republican, you have to be in favor of building a wall, of
No, wait a minute.
cutting
They had a
taxes.
bipartisan bill to reform immigration, and Republicans
Yeah.
backed it because they were afraid Trump wouldn't get elected president.
Right, right. Well, that's my point. That as soon as you come together on these things, that's the exception. Being able to come to an agreement is the exception, not the
Well, the
rule.
child tax credit too was
Yeah.
agreed.
But if you take your congressperson, do you assume, and in this case it's Morgan McGarvey for me, do I assume that he agrees with me on all the issues? You know, I mean, I think that would be unwise. Does he have to? You know, could he be a Democratic candidate and be pro-life? Could he, be a Republican candidate and favor LGBT community? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me that you take someone and you paint them red or blue, and then you know who they are. And that's as I say, I think that's part of the problem.
Well, I think you know how they're going to position themselves in their administration of their responsibilities. So we generally know how a Democrat candidate is going to think and act and perform, regardless of their personal. They may be pro-life or not pro-life, or they may be a hawk or not, but you have a general idea of the leaning of each one. So I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I generally agree with his direction. So I've got to make a choice. I choose that candidate.
Yeah, but the
I
extreme
think David's got that exactly right. Michael, I would be willing to bet that you and Morgan McGarvey would agree on maybe 75% of issues. Wouldn't you think that's probably true?
Well, I do. That's why I voted for him.
Things.
Yeah, I explored him. I found out what his positions were, and that's why I voted for him. But my point is, right now, being a congressman, if you are Lauren Bobbitt from Colorado, all right,
yeah,
you got the easiest job in the world. You don't have to do a damn thing. All you have to do is show up and vote the way your party says. You don't have to know anything about anything. You don't have to explore any issues at all. All you have to do is raise enough money and get yourself on TV enough to get back in office, and then you don't have to come up with legislation. You don't have to be competent. You don't have to know anything. You just vote the way they tell you to vote, and that's it. I don't want people like that. I want intelligent people who are able to serve on committees and provide valuable information to the committees, contribute a point of view that makes sense. I don't want just a check mark. So.
You do see a lot of that, and it's easy enough to remember 2 or 3 talking points supporting the issue that you're going to have to support.
Right.
And probably you're supporting it because you want to support it too. I would assume that Boebert believes what she's proposing, and she agrees mostly with the party.
What we see is their public image. What are they and their staff doing when they're not in the chamber?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point, because there's a lot of Republicans who really want to support rights to abortion, at least under some circumstances and so on. We know that. And in fact, Biden's counting on that as a pretty big part of the platform to wean some of those people away from Trump, as it is. So, yeah, and that goes with other, some other issues too. I remember who was it? The Senator No, he was one of Reagan's, or he found out his daughter was lesbian. And he
Jane?
ended up completely changing his mind about that, and he began supporting it. It was one of those Dick,
Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney.
Cheney.
Dick Cheney
Yeah,
had
of
a
course.
lesbian daughter.
And he's not the only one who did that.
Yeah.
You know, McCain was heavily influenced by certain things that had happened to him, and that made him a fighter for, you know, often directly opposing his party. You know, and thank goodness there are people, and one of you mentioned Romney as a guy in many ways. You know, he's spoken his truth, and he's believable, is what I think.
And he
Well,
got
it's-
a flyway to get over the bridge to the Cape easier. He's my hero for that.
He took that rotary out on the.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Romney he was going. He had to be at some meeting on the Cape, and it was like a 2 hour backup at the bridge over the canal. And he said, "Something's got to be done about this." And the next thing you know, we have a rotary that makes it easier to get over the bridge.
Personal
How
experience is
often
My
did it-
hero. He also came up with the kind of healthcare program that Obamacare is kind of modeled on. That was Romney.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We had another Republican governor, Baker, Charlie Baker, who was, these guys, they want to solve problems. You know, they don't want to grandstand, and
Yeah.
and that's what we need, some practical people, not a bunch of ideologues.
Yeah, Murkowski was like that to an extent as well. And who was it? Collins of Maine.
Well, she's been
Yeah,
going along with not actually voting in the way people, or she said she would, or people thought she. I can't think of specifics, but I know she was a lot of nasty political cartoons about her.
Mhm.
Mm.
Well, once again, the primary elections are where those folks who are more serious citizens get thrown out in favor of the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world.
Yeah, I don't understand that
Yeah, if you're a Republican and you work with Democrats to try to resolve an issue, you're going to get blasted in the primary and you won't be eligible for the next election. That's why the primary elections, they're wrong. They're just not a good idea for it was better, David, back to your point, it was better when we had the smoke-filled rooms. We got better candidates then.
You think?
Yeah, absolutely, I think, because it may not have been as democratic within that organization as we might want it to be, but idiots were unlikely to be nominees. You may have some tyrannical people, but you didn't get fools elected. And we're able to elect fools now because we just let everybody vote. And I guess that comes down to this is someone was mentioning how in the foundation and the founding fathers, they were wrestling with this idea of direct democracy, and they were afraid of direct democracy, and I think rightfully so. If you just ask the mob what they want, you're not going to get a good solution. So the refinements of representative democracy make sense. But unfortunately, we've lost the institutions that were the foundation for representative democracy. We've fractured our communities. Right now, I'm more, here I am talking to guys who don't live within 2 miles of me. I'm not talking to my next door neighbor. I'm not talking to the guy that I might physically run into.
The way your district was drawn.
Well, it's my point is you're more likely to know somebody who's miles away from you than you are to know the person next door.
Right.
Well, in the old days, and David, I remember you grew up in Holy Spirit Parish, right?
Right.
That was a very different place than Holy Trinity Parish or Our Lady of Lourdes Parish. We defined these parishes by region. And so if you went to church with someone, they lived in your neighborhood, or at least, adjacent to your neighborhood. Nowadays, the institution split up. And so you go to church with no, so there's none of that formation that goes on when you have local discussions. We don't have as many unions and fraternal organizations as we used to have. So where do people form their opinions? They get it off the internet, they get it off of TV, they get it off of other mass media. Well, who's in charge of that? Well, we know that. So I'm kind of curious as to how this is going to work out. And I did want to catch you up before we run out of time here. I have just joined the League of Women Voters, and I'm going to a training session with the League of Women Voters next week. And I'll report back to you what happens there. But I mentioned to you that I'm trying to do a voter information project in my precinct. And it became clear to me that I shouldn't do that on my own, that I need to get some support. But the idea of trying to talk to people in my precinct and give them voting information, and I don't care which way they vote. I'm not after Democrats. I'm after voters, and getting them to, make sure you're registered, make sure you know how to vote, make sure you know how to vote early if you need to. If you need a ride to the polls, we'll get you a ride to the polls, that kind of thing. And I hope that this might develop into something good. I have high hopes for it. If I can get 10 people out of the several thousand who live in my precinct, if I can get 10 people who didn't vote before to vote this time, I'll feel good about it. Even if they all vote for Trump, I'll feel good about it, because I want them to exercise democracy. Too much of what we get is coming from parties, and they have an agenda.
Michael, I want to reference back to the back room.
Yeah.
Politics. I learned recently that my grandfather was a Louisville City Council member appointed in 1925. So I did a little research. Okay, what was going on at that time? The governor of Kentucky, the mayor of Kentucky, there was rampant corruption.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go into detail. You don't need to know. Rampant corruption in politics.
Yeah. No, it's always been there.
You see, Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
Yeah.
Right there, that boss, the party boss.
Yeah.
Michael, we support you no matter what gender you decide to vote in.
And
Just tell us which pronoun to use.
Oh yeah, I'll give my pronouns.
Does it really come to
dress
that?
up like
Sam?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift for first lady.
No, that's
It's a funny late night. I don't watch late night, but I get the summaries in the New York Times, and they have clips of some of these guys have the funniest bits about what's going on. It really takes kind of lightens the load on what's going on.
the permutations are interesting too, because now the Republicans are urging people to cheer for the San Francisco 49ers instead of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Kansas is a red state, and San Francisco sure as hell isn't red. So they're asking people to root for the other side.
There's that conspiracy theory that this game was fixed so that Kansas would win, and that then they would win the Super Bowl, and then Taylor Swift would give a endorsement. The Republicans are afraid that Taylor Smith's going to endorse Biden, and all the millions of fans are going to vote for Biden, and there goes the chance for.
Yeah.
Hey, William Butler Yeats said it: "The center cannot hold."
Yep.
Well, if I tell you what, if Joe Biden figured out how to engineer all of this, then he's the greatest genius ever, and I'm going to vote for him just on that basis. He's got to be an incredible genius to have contracted.
These slouches towards Bethlehem to be.
You think he was the matchmaker between Taylor and Kelsey?
Oh yeah, of course he was. Yeah. Oh, gee. Well.